Getting to go to post-secondary school has been positioned as a huge opportunity for all of us growing up. Getting a college degree equals better job opportunities, a higher income, and a higher likelihood of living a good life. For some people, it's what's expected of them because both their parents got bachelor degrees and it worked out well enough for them, so you should follow that same sure thing path too. And for others, it could be the push to becoming the first college graduate of their family, a symbol of hope for a better future, better jobs, and working towards generational wealth. Either way, the message is clear. Post-secondary education is the most straightforward and stable way to get a good job and have a good future. And so people are going to pursue that path no matter what. The problem is that there's a predatory system in place that can really defeat the entire purpose of the degree and also make the system not work the way that it was initially intended to. That system is student loans. And hold on a second, if you're hearing student loans and predatory system in the same sentence and you don't agree with that, then give us a second to explain. Because student loans actually didn't start out that way. At first, student loans were a way to encourage more people to go to post-secondary school, and it even gave more access to people who couldn't go in the past because of the financial barrier. If we look at the US specifically, student loans really took off in 1958. This was after the Soviet Union beat the Americans to space, and the US wasn't very happy about this, so they decided to do something about it. They introduced a federal student loan program where people could take out up to $1,000 per year to go to college. And this was a huge catalyst for people actually going to post-secondary school and getting that degree, which is exactly what the government initially wanted. Things were looking great for a little while, and the economy was growing. But over time, as more and more people went to college and demand was rising, the cost started to increase too. This led to bigger loans being taken out and more people going to more expensive colleges, until things really got out of control.
All of that really hit a major tipping point during the Great Recession. Throughout the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, the cost of post-secondary education was already ballooning, and student loans were also growing. Total student loan debt in the US was sitting just below $500 billion in 2006 and 2007, but then everything was kicked into an even higher level during the 2008 financial crisis. Think about it, people were losing their jobs, they had no money, everything was a mess, and so what a lot of people decided to do was say, hey, maybe I should go to school or go back to school, and then maybe I can then use that to find a job. And that's exactly what people did. Enrollment in colleges went up higher than ever before. And here's the part that starts to get really messed up. Between 2008 and 2018, college costs went up 25%, which is a lot, but not compared to student loans, which went up by 107% during that same 10-year period. And that's what brought us to where we are today. As of 2022, there's over $1.75 trillion in student loan debt in the US. And yes, I said trillion. Now that debt is spread across 44 million Americans, meaning that the average amount of student loan debt that people have is close to $40,000. And obviously there's people who have a lot more than that too. And this problem really doesn't just exist in the US, it's just really on like a whole nother level there. Like here in Canada, people have student loans too.
What is your name?
Jason.
Jason, do you have student loan debt?
Yeah, so I'd say maybe 15,000, which I'd probably start paying off once I graduate.
School's expensive as hell.
What is your name?
Boomy.
Do you have student loan debt?
Yeah. I would say $2,000-$3,000.
What is your name?
Caleb.
Do you have student loan debt?
Yes. Honestly, I would say I'm like pretty privileged in comparison to a lot of other people. Like I have under 10,000.
The numbers just don't sound so extreme with our population being 10 times smaller than the US, but around 2 million Canadians owe $22 billion in federal student loan debt, with the average outstanding loan being around $13,000. Here's the thing, student loans haven't just gotten out of hand when it comes to how much debt people are taking out and owing. The student loan system itself has become a really nasty trap.
This trap really started when the US federal government changed the way that they handle student loans. See, they used to partner with banks to make low interest loans to students, but the banks made a lot of money from this, like billions of dollars just for being involved. So in 2010, the government realized this wasn't necessary spending anymore and they cut out the banks, making it so that students work directly with the government to take out loans. The Department of Education became the largest bank in America when it came to loans, just like how Starbucks is bigger than a lot of banks in the US when it comes to holding cash. Now, the real problem with this is that the government still had to outsource the loan process, and this is where loan servicers come in. And it's also really where the predatory behavior comes in too. Loan servicers are basically the new middleman between students and the government. They manage student loans on behalf of the federal government, so even if a student takes out a federal student loan, they actually have to work with this private company to pay it off. Now, in theory, these services are there to help students with collecting the bills and making sure they paid them off on time, and also to give out information about different repayment plans. But unfortunately, these different companies started just focusing on maximizing their profits instead. Not very surprising. Now, just one example of this is that the customer service people were expected to spend no more than 7 minutes per phone call, which is obviously not very much time to explain to someone all of their different options and actually discuss the best option for them, especially if they're struggling to pay off their loans. So they didn't. Instead, they just suggested the quickest option, which was typically putting your loans into forbearance. That meant that these people stopped paying off their loans at all, which cost them huge in the future. Then there's the issue with income-based repayment plans. Again, in theory, it sounds great. If you have a lower income, you can pay less money monthly towards your loans. But the problem here is that interest keeps building. So all of the money that you are paying towards your loans every month, it just barely covers the monthly interest. Actually, some people who are on income-based repayment plans see their balance grow every single month still. How would that problem ever be fixed?
I've paid off $9,000 of the loan, but only of the interest. I've only paid $97 of principal. Because I'm paying less, the interest accrues more. So it just feels like quicksand.
And there are so many other examples that I could get into here, but I think you get the point. The current student loan system's a mess. And I actually think that a lot of people agree with that. It's just what should be done about it is where the disagreements come in.
The debate about student loan forgiveness has been a hot topic for years now, and people are really passionate about the subject, mostly because it kind of impacts everyone. So we're talking 1 out of 8 Americans with student debt, and everyone else without it who pays taxes and feels personally invested in this.
Oh, they get the burden of having paid off these other people's student loans.
I think it's a great start. I mean, it's not everything that we want, but it's a great start.
Now, there's 3 main sides to the conversation. 1, people who still have outstanding student loan debts that they're struggling to pay off. 2, people who've already paid off their student loan debts or aren't struggling with it. And 3, people who never took out student loans to begin with, whether it's because they could pay for it without it or because they never went to college to begin with. Some people agree that there are issues with the student loan system, sure, but why should everyone have to pay for other people's problems? Why should someone who never went to college have to pay for someone who got a random philosophy degree and couldn't find a high-paying job? Duh. Why should people who chose to get an engineering degree because it was the smart choice and then worked really hard to pay off their student loans have to now pay for someone else's student loans and not get the benefit themselves? Other people are in favor of loan forgiveness because of those predatory practices that we talked about earlier, and also because student loan forgiveness wouldn't mostly help those who chose a bad degree. For example, one huge part of the story that gets overlooked a lot is that almost 40% of those 44 million people with student loan debt never actually finished their degree. That means that millions of people have piling student loan debt and no degree to leverage for a higher salary to actually help them pay it off. And like we said earlier, that's the entire point of higher education, right? Get the degree, leverage it for a higher salary than what you would otherwise get. But if you aren't able to finish your degree, then you have debt and no higher salary, leaving you in a trap that's really hard to get out of. Again, when people hear that, they may argue that it was their bad decision to take on the debt and not finish their degree. They should have to literally pay for their consequences. Why should my tax dollars go towards helping them? Here's where the argument of fairness comes into play. The thing is, most government and social programs aren't fair in the sense that they don't impact every single person equally. Like, if we look at the government providing this type of support to businesses that make mistakes and need some help, do we keep that same energy of being mad about that? We also read this really interesting article by this Harvard professor who said that they were against student loan forgiveness for years, but now they actually believe that debt cancellation is necessary. They changed their mind because they realize that so many people say that it's not the best solution, but then they become paralyzed from actually doing anything to fix the system. It's the classic let's do nothing instead of doing something situation. They even ended the article by saying that student loan forgiveness isn't just warranted, it's what's fair. Government policy did harm, and it's government policy that should work to reverse it.
Finally, in 2022, after years of debating and a lot of people thinking that it would never happen, the current president of the United States came out and said that loan forgiveness is happening.
We will forgive $10,000 in outstanding federal student loans.
President Biden announcing his long-awaited plan to forgive student loans for millions of Americans.
And there's actually been some movement in Canada too.
For students, we are permanently eliminating interest on Canada student loans and apprenticeship loans.
For the American plan, not all student loan debt's being forgiven, but for anyone who earns less than $125,000 per year, $10,000 in federal student loans will be. And for any low-income students who are eligible to receive a Pell Grant, $20,000 of federal student loan debts will be cleared. So for anyone who's eligible to have $10K forgiven, if you have $6,000 of federal student loan debt left, you'd have that entire $6,000 cleared, but you wouldn't get the additional $4K. This This plan will almost completely wipe out student debt for about 20 million people, which is obviously a huge dent into the 44 million people with federal loans. It'll specifically help a lot of those people who never finished their degree. Actually, about half of people who have less than 10K left in debt never got their degree and will have these loans completely cleared. And it'll also help about 5 million people whose loans are currently in default. Overall, the 10K in forgiveness is most likely to fully eliminate debt for the people with the least education. And on top of that, about 90% of the benefits will be going to people who are earning $75,000 or less per year. Now, what I do have to add to that is that figure of $75,000 does include current students or new grads who could potentially end up earning more than $75,000 in the near future, so we do have to keep that in mind. Now, there's a few things that I found specifically interesting about this plan, one being that it obviously doesn't forgive everything. It's kind of in the middle of the two sides of things, one being people who wanted everything to be cleared and the other being people who wanted nothing to be cleared. And the other thing that's really interesting is the conversation about if now is the right time to do student loan forgiveness, right? Like obviously inflation's up high right now, we're in recession territory, so people are concerned that if we cut down on student loans and all these millions of people don't have to pay anymore, they'll now have more money to spend on other stuff and put into the economy, which could potentially drive up inflation. Now, the one rebuttal against this that, again, thought was interesting is the fact that student loan repayments have already been paused for the last 2 years. So really there's no difference. And also the student loan repayment pause is stopping in the new year. So all the people that do have student loans left to repay will actually be kind of offsetting it by continuing to pay their student loans. Either way, we personally are in favor of student loan forgiveness. And keep in mind that this is coming from someone, Dennis specifically, who paid off over $45,000 in student loans himself within 2.5 years of graduating from university. There are always going to be some people that benefit more from different policies and programs in place, but just because it doesn't benefit every single person doesn't mean it's not having a positive impact on society overall. Now, the other thing we do feel though is that simply forgiving student loans without actually addressing all of the different things in place that caused this crisis to begin with isn't ideal.
If predatory loan servicers are allowed to continue their practices and income-based repayment doesn't start to actually bring down the principal balance, and if colleges don't start to get cheaper, and if we don't start to educate 17 and 18-year-olds on how the entire system works, without all of that, the problems are gonna build back up again. That's why Canada's update on permanently eliminating interest on federal student loans is an interesting one that's going to have an ongoing and not just this like one-time impact. Anyways, guys, we wanna know where you stand on this topic. Please let us know down in the comment box below. We obviously wanna discuss, right? So if you have some separate thoughts, make sure you drop them down in the comment box and make sure you like down below, make sure you subscribe, and yeah, make sure you check out any of our previous videos. We did a video last week on capitalism actually, so anyone can make it but not everyone can make it, so make sure you check out that video next door. We will be back, you know the vibes. Let's